um, uh, pending on some discussion that we're still having about how to manage the kind of we have two types of events. When an ONU shows up at the OLT, that is one type of event that would trigger a port add message, and when somebody actually plugs an RG into the ONU, then we get a link up. Well, we should get a link up event to be able to track the entire life cycle of the ONU. Okay, so that covers the OLT. Any questions? No? Okay. So moving on swiftly to the multicast app. So the application has been designed. We're going to review it with DirecTV because they have a very similar use case, and they have better knowledge. They know PIM much better than we do, or I do at least. And so we're going to prototype the multicast app for Cord with DirecTV. And there's been a few iterations on the role of the fabric in multicast traffic, and I think this has largely been ironed out now. There might be a few questions remaining. Saurabh?
Yeah. Okay. I think it's not so much the role of the fabric; it's more like what you think the multicast should be and what Tom thinks the multicast should be.
Yeah, I think in his last email we agreed that what I was.
I didn't see this last email. Right.
Yeah,
You agreed or not?
I thought he was still saying you should only send the groups that have been requested to each OLT.
No, he said we're saying the same thing. He said.
We have to read.
At least that's how I understood it. Maybe I misunderstood, but I got the sense that we agreed that like.
He's saying that the stream should not go to the OLTs that don't subscribe to that particular stream.
Yeah.
Even in the last minute.
Yeah, that's direct.
No, I read it differently.
Okay.
So, whoever talking with Ali, we can't hear you.
Sorry?
They can't.
Whoever you were discussing with, we could only hear your side of the conversation.
Well, that's all you really care about.
Yes, true.
No, the way I read it is there was an OLT, and the OLT receives all the flows that it's subscribed to, and nothing more. The key phrase in that the key phrase here was that the fabric doesn't flood multicast, right? Meaning that oh wait, maybe I got this wrong.
Each OLT receives all groups that it has joined and none others. So Tom said.
Anyway, then I take back my comment and we'll revisit this. Okay, so Cord VPN.
Oh.
You want to come a bit closer so you can get picked up by the microphone?
For compute node bootstrap, I resolved OSDB device availability incorrect issue. It was actually a bug in OSDB provider, and some guy fixed it. And minimized the OSDB dependency because it's not as stable as other providers in ONOS, and keeping unnecessary OSDB connection is not a good idea. So I now CodeVTR make a connection to OSDB only for Bootstrap, and for detecting port or VM, it uses other providers in ONOS. And for neutron interaction, I changed it to use OpenStack switching service, and now CodeVTR works in a stateless manner. And in the last sprint, there was a network node which runs a DHCP agent and metadata agent. It's not needed anymore. So I think managing multiple agents is painful, so I think it's good.
Cool, thank you. That's cool. So the reason for making the Cord VTN app stateless was to avoid having multiple places where state resides about network configuration, and that thereby like reducing the risk of getting out of sync between either XOS or OpenStack holding network state or network configuration state versus ONOS holding network configuration state. So ONOS gets the request for a network configuration, whether that's a network edit, and then queries Neutron to get all the details that it needs to provision that on the database.
ONOS queries Neutron in the reverse path
It gets the event
from Neutron.
from Neutron,
Yeah.
and then also asks Neutron for information. It doesn't maintain any information. So it gets any information that's missing from the event to complete whatever it needs to program the data plan. And we keep no state inside of ONOS. That thereby we avoid having the state in OpenStack, having the state in ONOS, and then running the risk of one of them getting out of sync. So then if they're out of sync, it's just going to be a nightmare to figure out what's missing and how to resynchronize it, especially at runtime. Better to keep it in one place, go for it. And my claim is that creating networks and creating things should be relatively infrequent, that the cost and the overhead of querying is going to be largely minimal because it's all provisioning, and you provision once you get out of the way. So that's kind of the claim for now. We'll see how it pans out, but that's the idea.
Sorry. Remind me what core VTN is, because I forgot.
So it's essentially the ONOS application that interfaces with XOS and OpenStack, takes in the requests from Neutron or from XOS and provisions them on the data plane, and also spins up OVSs and configures tunnel ports in them and so on.
Is it I generally see that workflow from Neutron to SDN controllers, but never from SDN controllers to the Neutron. Is that acceptable or agreed?
It's unacceptable. I mean, there's no reason why you can't do it, but it's just that we're choosing to take that solution. Right?
So Neutron must be providing query APIs?
It does, right?
Neutron APIs are
Yeah, you can already query them.
Neutron already provides a set of APIs. Generally, the orchestrator calls Neutron APIs, which gets translated into the SDN controller APIs. Now we are doing a loop. SDN controller is also calling the Neutron APIs.
But only to fetch information. Only to fetch, not to program. Right? So Neutron will always call the Neutron API on ONOS. That will always happen. It's just that we will need other information. There will be other information, and we don't keep this information locally. We go and fetch it. Just to avoid. I mean, we could do it. You could do the same thing by having Neutron call ONOS and ONOS going off and configuring and keeping that state. The issue is if you keep that state and then things get out of sync, then it's a nightmare, right? How do I bring these two guys back in state? What if Neutron says something, but it thinks it said configure this network, and it never happened because the packet was lost and the API call failed for some reason, and there was no error message? What do we do? Right? Neutron thinks it's done it. ONOS hasn't done it. What do you do? Right? It's better to lose an event, right, and say just lose an event, but there's no state in ONOS for that, and Neutron says, well, nothing's happened here, right? So I have to do it again.
The only concern is it causing any tight coupling between Neutron and our controller?
I don't think so. No. I mean, we don't use any special APIs. We don't invent any new APIs. Right? The APIs for Neutron are the same ones that always existed. So the query APIs have always existed. Right? You can always ask, what's the network? What's the VMs in this network? Where are they connected? And so on. Those things always existed. We're not adding anything new. Fabric?
Yeah, so we completed 24 points, 16 are ongoing. We didn't get to 7 of them. The application, the big contribution was that L2 forwarding, learning, flooding, all of those. The support for that, generic support for that, was added by Charles. He also added a host provider for doing things where, like in Cord, we don't necessarily need to learn, and we could just program it. program the fabric switch for the L2 information that we need. Other than that, we also found a couple of race conditions in the app that we fixed after talking to Srikanth, and also identified a couple of bugs in the ONOS core. And I've mainly been working on the driver. It's about 75% complete. And because our FDPA is fairly complicated, we found a couple of places where we needed to change the next objective API. That hasn't been submitted to get it yet, but take a look at it.
How did you change it?
Well, so we had to add a metadata field for places where the application needs to tell something to the driver, but not necessarily all drivers. So it's ignored by most drivers, but the one driver that needs it can use it. It's mostly for sort of VLAN processing on egress ports and stuff like that. Switch testing has been going on. So Flavio has been doing a lot of things, and as you know, we have identified a number of bugs that have been reported to Broadcom. I sent out a status on the mailing list. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask. He's also started automated testing using OFTest, because right now he's the only one with the access to the hardware. Design standpoint, we've also been looking at how the fabric should support multicast streams, how it should support double VLAN forwarding, and also pseudo wires. So I just had a discussion with Broadcom yesterday about some of these more complicated features. And what we didn't get to was documentation fell behind, and we have the equipment in-house, but we need to start racking it. So Luca and I are going to work on that before Thanksgiving next week. We'll make some space and we rack things up and power it up.
Yeah, apparently the servers will be arriving on Tuesday as well.
Oh, good, great.
So.
Okay. So.
Anything else? Your Honor?
Yeah, so for the vRouter, we've made a lot of progress on gathering the requirements from AT&T. So we're at the point where we can start sort of getting together a protocol stack that's going to talk the protocols we need to the upstream devices. There's a test setup that's being worked on at the AT&T Foundry. Don, I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Sorry, had to unmute. So it's built, the router is built that you're going to peer with. I just got that update. But, so hopefully maybe Monday we can set aside some time and start trying to bring up BGP and OSPF. If you're ready for that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yep.
Sounds good. Yeah, and we've started talking to the Tech Mahindra folks. So there's a small team in Tech Mahindra in India that's going to be working on developing the protocol stacks, testing them with the AT&T setup, and making sure that they work correctly, and also developing any bug fixes or anything that we need to make them work properly. So we started working with them and bringing them up to speed. And then on the ONOS side of it, I've started sort of rearranging slightly and modularizing some of the routing code within ONOS so that we can basically leverage all the existing code we have for the vRouter work. And this basically just gives us more flexibility in what pieces of the routing code are going to be loaded at any one time. So the vRouter can load the pieces that it needs, and then STNIP can load the other pieces that it needs. So yeah, that's all for vRouter.
Why do you need OSPF in core?
So this is the uplink to the outside world, basically.
Isn't BGP sufficient for that?
This is a requirement from AT&T, because this is the point where you have to interact with their network, right? So
BGP is not enough because you cannot treat cord as a separate AS. So eBGP would have been fine if you treated cord as a separate AS, but cord is treated as a router within their existing AS, which is why we need OSPF.
So XOS team?
Yeah, so I've been working on the containers on bare metal work item, and that's sort of mostly done. We have a little bit of to do on some test cases and making it a little less fragile. But what we've done this sprint is I've integrated the virtual machine container and container in a virtual machine abstractions all into the XOS instance object. I've integrated the new container instances with the VCPE tenant so that we can do some sort of minimal stuff there with the S tags and the C tags, and prove that we're able to get our networking abstraction working. And then I've added some XOS network parameters to formalize our support for S tags, C tags, bridges for the interfaces, devices, and the next hop for the VBNG. And I'm going to, if we have time during this meeting, I'll do a short demo at the end where I'll walk people through the UI elements to demonstrate how all this works in XOS.
So on the Docker REST API, so Don made available to us his REST API that he had put together. So this is a Node-RED application that basically wraps some Docker and pipework commands for spinning up Docker containers on bare metal and connecting them in to the network. So I played around with this and found that it seemed like it was essentially functionally equivalent to the containers on bare metal approach that Scott just outlined, which is working now. So it's my understanding is that Cord is not required to actually use the REST API component, but rather that was one way that we could implement containers on bare metal. And as Scott described, we have already now built in a solution that does it. So the recommendation from this process was that we use the working containers on bare metal approach that Scott discussed. It works as long as it continues to meet the project requirements. That's great. We can use it.
I'm just going to repeat, right? You got Swarm, Mesos, Kubernetes. There seems to be so many approaches, already existing open source software to deploy containers on bare metal, Docker Compose, Swarm, whatever. Just to keep harping on it, I guess. It seems to need to be redundant to build our own.
Well, so okay, so it's easy to set up a Docker container. I mean, there's a million ways you can do this. The thing that is a little bit challenging from the standpoint of Cord is the networking piece, I think, because we have this Q and Q tagging that's going on between the container and the OLT, and maybe there's Docker components out there that do that weird kind of networking that can be used to solve this problem. I'm not aware of them, but please let me know if there's things out there that we should be looking into. So it seems like are we rolling our own? Well, not really. We're using, in Scott's case, we're using Ansible to set up a Docker container. But I guess we're doing there's definitely overlap between that and other solutions. But as far as I can understand, we can't just pick up one of these other solutions out of the box and use it here. But, again, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I'd like to get together with you, it's not in this current review, because there are solutions to some of the networking issues too, and I think we need to, and I need to understand better what you're describing in terms of the networking issues. Absolutely, but it seems to me there's might be another approach here that we want to consider, and we can take some of that offline because I said I don't know all of the details of what you're dealing with.
Who's that talking?
Probably. Pardon?
Who are you?
David Bainbridge.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested in that conversation as well, because if there's a Docker methodology that already solves the networking besides the Pipeworks type of approach, I'd be very interested in it. I know Docker has recently an experimental got some networking, but really your option there is Linux bridging, unless you want to, you know, write your own plugin, which is
Right.
which is doable, perhaps not, you know, in time for this particular demo.
Yeah, and this is where I'd like to see, you know, ONOS come into play, and maybe there's some combination of let's use one of these other kind of just ways to deploy containers, and then hook that in with some ONOS for the networking. And again, that's something I think we should look into.
Yeah, so this is Larry. Just real quickly, this is a bigger offline discussion, and we should definitely have it. But just a reminder, it's not just the networking; it's the blend of KVM and containers. It's not just one or just the other, and it's not just
Understood.
KVM. It's lots of moving parts.
Yeah. I think overall this is a good idea that you're finally realizing that OpenStack is something you don't want to use, and sort of moving away from it's a great idea.
I wouldn't quite say we're moving away from it. I think what we're doing in the limit here is we are reducing OpenStack to
It's useful.
as primitive of infrastructure as a service as we could possibly make it.
Yeah. So reducing it to its useful components, I guess, is how I would.
Exactly.
So yeah, this is a great conversation. Can I just suggest that that you have any emails that are about this subject happen on the mailing list rather than direct to each other, because whatever you guys decide here has impact on other parts of the system, and it's better that it's good for the other people who, you know, for the other people to have visibility on whatever you guys are discussing, just in case, so that we don't get too far out of sync.
Yep.
Yes.
Is David going to set up a discussion?
I didn't hear that, Bill.
Who's setting up the discussion?
I'll key up a discussion on the email list, and we can see if we need to get into a hangout and do that as well.
Sounds good. Perfect. But yeah, okay, cool. XOS Team Part 2.
Yes. So the Cloud Lab development environment, the issue we were facing with the OLT app was resolved by Jono, and so the end-to-end data plane between the client and the internet does work now. The client can access the internet by traversing, all of the elements in between. I think the next steps here is we're not quite at the point where we could run the ONS demo that we showed in June on the development environment, but we're pretty close. So I think that's the next step. There's still, I guess, an issue with the OLT in this environment not passing ARP packets. Jono and I have been going back and forth on that, and I guess a fix is coming. So right now there's some static ARP entries that need to be put in the setup to get it to work. And we need some documentation on how to set this up.
Is there any way this can be packaged? As in, documentation of how to set this up is useful, but is there any way this can be wrapped in a package and within Cloud Lab where people can respawn this environment in kind of an easy way without having to go through and spawning the VMs themselves?
Yeah, I mean, so basically, it's not quite like just one click, but there is an XOS configuration that uses Tosca to spin everything up. and so
Okay.
it's pretty easy. There's definitely room for improvement, but we're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to duplicate this setup.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks.
And I guess, so Larry and Scott and I were talking a little while ago about when will we be ready to take the next step of, going off of Cloud Lab and starting to build this development environment on real hardware. So that's, I guess, something that we can talk about for the next sprint.
Yeah. So the hardware is arriving next week. Well, the hardware will be cabled up next week. Whether we build a development environment or on that hardware, or kind of more of a lab environment, rather. Maybe those two are the same. I don't know.
The point is,
On that hardware.
we can't really realistically support lots of developers on that one pod. We still
No.
right.
No.
So that we have to absolutely take that step, obviously, for integration purposes. But it's there's a balancing act here because we could really invest a lot of time in this and develop this emulated development environment. In fact, it occurred to me we could maybe figure out a way to slip Minilab under or Mininet under this. So we could sink a lot of time in here. We have to be really careful about that.
I mean, we could. It depends. If I mean, do you think this is something that's useful to sink a lot of time in, or do we need to move forward on other aspects of XOS?
It's extremely useful. I think in the end we'll have to. It's just a prioritizing. I mean, there could be issues with Cloud Lab that are artifacts we want to not have to worry about. But we do need some fairly straightforward metal as a service, and from there you can boot up to a core development environment.
So I don't disagree with that. I think that's hugely valuable. I'm just wondering whether it should be, how high on the priorities it should be, and I guess we can talk about that on Monday when we do the planning session.
So I do think that, assuming the next sprint has some focus on integrating VTN, which we've been talking about, that may tell us whether we're going to hit hurdles or it's going to be straightforward.
Okay. That works for me.
Okay, so other status. So the Open Cloud reinstall for Kilo has gotten underway. So there's a new XOS portal for Open Cloud that is online now based on the Burwell release. And the Princeton cluster install is in progress. And I think Stanford will be underway pretty soon, maybe next week. And we also have an Arizona cluster that's waiting for some attention. But things are moving along there.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Acord, Srikant?
Yes. Thank you. Okay, the completed stories in this sprint are we made some data model changes in XOS to support multiple tenant Docker containers inside the same virtual machine. Prior to that, we were spinning up one VM per container, which is obviously not very optimized. So we made the model changes to support this multi-containers inside the same virtual machine as part of this story. And also, there was one more in progress story, again in the XOS data model changes to provide access to the non-admin users to create these Ceilometer tenants. Earlier, we were restricting creation or any CRUD operations on these tenants only for admin users. We made some changes to allow non-admin users. Just now we have verified and it's working, so we can consider this as completed. In parallel, we have a few additional resources from Ericsson who are working on this Accord. So they are the activities which are in progress. The COD 126, where we are exploring various Ceilometer existing mechanisms, how we can support the publish subscribe based framework in Ceilometer. Today it's all query-based interface, and we are trying to bring up this PubSub interface such that applications can subscribe for a set of events and get notifications whenever the status changes or any event happens on those. Also, another ACORD requirement on ONOS is to have some kind of mirroring functionality inside ONOS. Currently, we are internally brainstorming on what various options that we have. Then we will put forth to the larger audience on how we can, what are the best options to support this mirroring functionality. This is required for the dynamically enabling the DPI kind of probes inside the network, for which we need ONOS to configure the network to mirror a selective traffic to that particular DPI or DPI engines. So this is also in progress. And that's all from the ACORD. Any questions?
Okay. I think maybe we should, for the mirroring part, maybe we should talk a little bit, but
sure, yeah.
That's okay for now. Okay, demos. So before we jump into demos, is there anyone that's on the line that has anything to add that wasn't captured in the slides?
We used to see.
Yeah, there wasn't. No, I'll take that as a no. There's no. Don, do you have anything to add about some of your work with the VSG?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was more of a conversation between me and Andy, but you know, we were discussing the slowness with Pipeworks and all that, and it hanging if it doesn't get an IP address. What we're moving to is a callback model where at each phase of the turnup, it just fires a callback. So that as long as you pass, you know, the JSON validation, it returns a 200 immediately. But you know, it's still a work in progress. So.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'm probably the only one on the call that actually understood what you said, but.
Yeah, which was why I wasn't really diving out onto the.
But here's the thing. So your work on VSG, whether it's in how you spin them up or how you deploy them or how they're configured on the bare metal machine, is relevant to the larger core system. So without us knowing what is actually going on, we're in the dark whether we can, you know, do anything behind the VSG. So I would highly encourage you to advertise the architecture and the method by which you are spinning up these things and how you're configuring them on the data plane. I would highly encourage you to advertise this on the mailing list sooner rather than later, so that we know whether this will work with us.
The only reason I haven't is I'm still waiting on one lawyer to bless the open sourcing.
Sure.
And we're beating them up daily.
Sure, but there's you know there's two parts. There's the API part and the implementation of that API, and there's actually what happens on the bare metal machine, right? What is it you're actually like? How is it built up? What assumptions have you made? Because if they're incompatible with the rest of code, then we have a problem.
Okay, I mean at this point we're real okay. Chastised, understood.
So I will just add to the email. But we're beating up on Don. This is actually on everybody.
Yes.
I'll just use Don as a whipping boy. We are trying to collect documentation together. The mailing list, one thing. There's a cord folder with a bunch of documents. We've got one on Volt. We've got one on Fabric, on and on and on. Having one in the virtual subscriber gateway, both at the abstraction layer, API layer, implementation, just a place to collect notes that isn't email. And if you have trouble getting to that link, let me know.
So this was not meant to be a chastising of any sort. The point is it's valid for everyone.
No, it should be.
No,
It should
that's
be,
fine.
because Andy and I have been having conversations nobody else knows about.
That's fine. That's fine. Regardless, all I'm trying to say is for every system in court, please have your conversations in the mailing list. That doesn't mean that you can't have private conversations. Obviously, you can, but at least advertise something on the mailing list about what's going on if you have questions. Because at the end of the day, court is an integration project, and we can't integrate without talking.
Yeah. So just to kind of understand what Andy and I are talking about, the problem we run into is pipework, which is what we're using to create interfaces and shove them into the namespace. Sometimes takes forever to return, even though when you look in the container, it's there, the route's there, everything's done. It just hasn't returned. So we're trying to make it so that you're not sitting there waiting to find out did anything happen. Just where you also get into trouble is if you're trying to pull DHCP using Pipeworks, and for some reason you're not getting an address, it just doesn't return. So we're trying to make it a responsive back-end platform. Right now, really the stuff I described is just, was a conversation Andy and I had last night, so I decided to try a different approach, make it more responsive. I don't know that I'm going to say we want to go forward with this. It's just an experimentation Mike and I are doing.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
So there's a demo now. Who'll be running this demo? Is it Scott or Andy?
This is Scott. I'll be running it.
All right. Let me just share your. You can share your screen and I'll present it to everybody.
I can hit screen share now.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'm just navigating screen share to get the right screen. I think I've got it. Okay, is everyone looking at an XOS screen?
Nope.
No.
Yep.
Okay, you are now.
Oh, yes, we are.
Okay, so this is the XOS slice abstraction. So I'm just going to walk people through the UI a little bit to see where the new abstractions come into play. So on slices, we now have an isolation level, which can be set to virtual machine, container, or container in a virtual machine. To get the container on bare metal support, you just set it to container, and then you would save it. I've already done that. So I'm going to go into services and Volt and Volt tenants. And we can see I've set up some Volts already. I'll add another one. Every Volt, as before, it has a service-specific ID. It's also got an S tag and a C tag. I just set them all to the same thing just for testing at the moment. Save it, and that will create a Volt. Then we're going to go into the VCPE slice again. And if we look at its instances, we'll see that it's got an instance down here. It's currently red. It takes like about 30 seconds to a minute for an instance to come up. So we just refresh it a couple times. And there, see, it's gone to green. That is the instance that is holding our virtual subscriber gateway. We can see it is a container. And if we look at our ports, we can see it's on the LAN network. It's on the WAN network, and it's got its own BCP private network that ties all the BCPs together. We've augmented the port abstraction, so ports can have parameters. So we can see that the LAN port, it has a parameter for C tag and S tag, a device, so the LAN gets put on ETH1, and a bridge. It goes to a bridge called BR LAN. Let's see if I can switch windows here. I will show you something else. This is, let me go back. Uh-oh. Just a second. I just have to figure out which machine I brought that up on. That was on CP2. So if we do a Docker PS, you should see that, yeah, about a minute ago, this Docker container came up. Go inside of it. We'll see that it has all of its interfaces. So the 192.168, that's the one on the LAN network. And then if we, I'm not going to do it, but if we went outside and looked at the OVS config, we'd see that it's hooked up to strip the VLAN tags, the S tag, the C tag, and do all of the stuff it needs to do. That's all I really had to show. It's just a quick demo. But any questions?
Well, where do you say the S tag and C tag, the S tag and C tag were stripped?
Yeah, they're so there's a. Oops. What do we got? You look inside of the start container script. So XOS dynamically generates these. Spell it wrong. Oh, user. XOS dynamically generates this script based on what was in that port object. So you can see it's got a function up here. Encapsulate S tag, so it does some stuff with configuring the LAN interface, and it sets up inside of that something that strips off the S tag, and then going on down, there's something, the actual pipework command. I just have to find it here. The actual pipework command that sets it up. I'm not sure which one it is at the moment, but there's these Docker commands down here that run pipework, going from a source device into the container device, the container name, the IP, the next hop, and the C tag. So it's all sort of in there, and we can see in here that there will have been lots of scrolling because there's lots of devices. Yeah, so these new BR LAN, so like BR LAN 118.118, that's the one that strips the 118 S tag and the 118 C tag. And that's what ends up getting plumbed into the container.
I see. So what you're doing is you have VLAN interfaces on the host machine, and then you plumb that interface into the container.
Yeah, yeah. So part of this is because we're running in our Devel environment on Cloud Lab. So we've done some we've done. Andy mostly set this up, but we've done some stuff with the creating a LAN bridge and its GRE tunnel to simulate the actual cord environment.
Okay. Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay. Thanks.
Sure.
So I think with that, we'll have the sprint planning session on Monday at 11 a.m. Pacific time. Yes, Sora?
Can the next sprint be 4 weeks? Because kind of next week is Thanksgiving,
yeah.
And then before so we essentially have starting Monday 1 month or rather 4 weeks to go to the break.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not doing 3 week and then another 1 week sprint, just do 4.
I'm okay with that. Usually we try to keep things in line with ONOS, and ONOS went with a 2 week sprint this time. So it's a larger conversation. So let's just say we have a sprint planning session on 11 a.m. on Monday, and it will.
So I put it on the cord calendar for 10.
So why is it 11?
I don't know.
Because you wrote that?
I didn't write that.
I didn't write it either. I don't know about it.
There. All right, so Monday at 10 a.m., and it will either be a 2 or a 4 week sprint, TBD. Okay? And with that, Thanks for attending the Cord sprint, and see you on Monday.
All right. Thanks, Ali.
No worries.
Bye, guys.
Ciao, everyone.
4 weeks.